and welcome to one of my kind of now patented fail-safe editions of Ben's Junk. But look at it this way, Ben's Junk never lets you crash. So anyway, unfortunately we're in for week number 2 in a row of truly loose, casual, rambly stuff, even by my standards. But yeah, the thing I was going to cover this week just didn't pan out. So my fail-safe when that sort of thing happens is to go through a bit of one of my collections. And this is going to be our second part of the journey through my audio cassettes, which I seem to only do once every few years. Like I'll do one of vinyl and then pick up on that a little more a few years later and just kind of bounce all around. Give myself something to fail safe with. So anyway, when I left Colorado in 2018, I had multiple bookshelves, and I had a bunch of audio cassettes on one of those bookshelves. And when I moved, I was just kind of throwing my tapes into wherever. And when I arrived here, I really cherry-picked my favorites and put them into the things with that you had back in the 80s and 90s with the drawers and all. And you saw that the last time I did this. Assuming you watched that. But as for this, I have a good idea of what's in here. I have dug through this a couple of times over the last several years, but I couldn't really tell you exactly what's in here. So it might be a bit of rediscovery all around here. So with that, let me take a quick cut here. I'll zoom in the camera and we'll just start digging through this box and see what catches my attention. And given it's a music thing, certain things I will talk way too long about, as I always do, and I will speak poorly and make bad word decisions. The two go hand in hand, and it'll just be a great time all around. All right, let's get this party started. And right out of the gate, this stands out to me. A single of Tone Loc's Wild Thing. Now, I've never been a big rap person. I've never been a big single person either, but this is actually a recent addition. For the Christmas episode this past year, what was it, Homies for the Holidays that I wanted to cover, I had to buy as part of a lot, and this was one of the other items in the lot. So that's how this got in here. This did not come with me from Colorado. Otherwise, oh yeah, AC/DC. So really, in a way, the first band that I got deep into. And yeah, it seems kind of weird at 8 or 9 years old I would really get into this. But for whatever reason, it caught my attention. A friend of mine had his dad's hand-me-down copy of Back in Black. And we listened to that thing a lot. We didn't necessarily grasp what was going on lyrically. But yes, this was a later one. And this is one of those later Digilog tapes. I think V. Westlife has discussed these things. So, digital mastered audio tapes. But yes, their live album, I have since acquired this on CD. And a pretty good and very raucous live album. Now, speaking of Back in Black, I see it right here. So this was one of the first things I ever bought with my own money at a little used record store called Angelo's, which I think still exists, not far from where I grew up, and it continued going for years after. But yeah, I'm sure this is one of those tapes that I paid $2.99 for at the time, and I'm sure this thing is probably unplayable by now, but obviously I've still got it. So let's just roll with the whole AC/DC thing. Let's get it out of the way. Here's another one of those Digilog tapes. I guess you can tell which ones I bought new. And I guess these things are starting to become valuable, which seems kind of strange to me. But there is something to be said for hard rock, heavy metal on cassette or vinyl, I suppose. Especially stuff from like the 80s where it gets really bright and you kind of have that nice roll-off on a cassette. Let's see here. Some of these I never did replace. I know I do not have Flick of the Switch on CD. That just never came to be. It took me years to get this one on CD. Who Made Who? Kind of a pseudo greatest hits. And this was one of my absolute first tapes that I bought with my own money, used. So yeah, I was already hitting the used bins at like 9 years old, in case you didn't understand just what a weird kid I was, and even weirder adult, I suppose. I see another $2.99er. This looks plenty familiar. The Razor's Edge. I do have this one on CD now. I found it in a thrift store bin many years later. Yeah, a lot of my very first ones in here. So I remember buying this next one at a garage sale in the 5th grade, and it was right at about the same time that I bought my Atari 2600, which I found at a garage sale, and I still consider my all-time greatest garage sale find. I peaked very early. But Rumors, which I have since acquired on vinyl and CD, and this was at least secondhand already at the time. So this has got one of those old Sound Warehouse stickers, and what is that, from '83? So I don't know how close to original in issue this is, but there is no barcode anywhere on it, so I would guess no later than 1980-ish, unless it had a sticker barcode, UPC code on it. And since we're talking Fleetwood Mac, this was actually a hand-me-down from my mom. She used to listen to this when I was a kid constantly, and ultimately bought it on CD and handed it down to me. Their greatest hits that sold a bazillion copies. And I have my own CD of it now. But funnily enough, when I hit the Fleetwood Mac these days, it's almost always pre-Stevie Nicks. I've got my favorites of Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham and so on, but yeah, I kind of burned myself out on it. Let's see here. More nostalgia. For me, I'm sure I've got several of these. If you're familiar with the old Truck Stop Comedy line. But Jeff Foxworthy, and I know I've got most of his, and I don't think I've bought more than one of his as a CD. But Foxworthy will always have a place in my blackened heart because he was the first stand-up comic I ever saw live. I was, I think I was just about to turn 13. And we sat up in the nosebleed seats, and I was a little disappointed because I listened to his most recent album a bunch of times, and he just did it almost verbatim. So anyway, this could get interesting, me having to dig down and deal with gravity, but another Laughing Hyena tape. These things were usually sold at truck stops, but at his peak, Foxworthy was so huge you could get these at Target and whatever big mainstream stores. So yeah, we're getting into the proper Warner Brothers albums, and these are actually in pretty good shape because it seems like I got some good mileage out of these. You Might Be a Redneck. I think that isn't that the best-selling comedy album of all time, or at least it was up until that point. Something to that effect. So these I've already discussed before in, at the very least, the Christmas albums thing, but the Warner Brothers Christmas tradition. And I mentioned that one had a bad side 1 and one had a bad side 2. There's your proof. So when I burned this to CD, when I finally got my second copy, I think on an episode of Archive Thrifts, I just took the good side from each one, and I did a little kind of homebrew remastering along the way. Otherwise, let's get into some more of my first tapes. So I certainly would have been of the right age to be into Michael Jackson. You can take that the wrong way quite easily now that I've heard that come out of my own mouth. But yeah, I was right there at the height of the Dangerous album and all. But yeah, my parents got me this Jackson 5 compilation, which got some pretty decent mileage out of me. And I don't think I've ever bought any Jackson 5 on CD, whatever I have is part of compilations of other things. Now, of course, when all the scandals hit, I dropped off of the whole Michael Jackson thing very quickly, but, you know, those last few years where he was a big thing, certainly amongst kids. So yeah, Off the Wall, all the biggies. Of course, Thriller, which was also one of the first things I ever owned on vinyl, plucked out of a used bin. Let's see, Bad. And most of these I have acquired on CD, and all from thrift store bins. I've never paid full price. Now, I don't know whatever happened to my cover for this one, but here's my old copy of Dangerous, which I have since acquired on CD via a thrift store bin. And otherwise, here's one that got ruined for me for life by Oddity Archive. His contribution to the Free Willy soundtrack, Will You Be There? So I always hear like some sort of like a German cab driver or something singing Michael Jackson when I hear that one song now. I don't remember really liking this movie. I don't really remember liking the soundtrack out of the hit, as it were. When I was in grade school, I got a bunch of tapes from my mom. I guess she just got sick of them or whatever. They were all, you know, used and so on. So I don't remember getting a whole lot of new ones, but she just handed a bunch down to me. And one of those was one of the biggies of the early 90s, Wilson Phillips, which I ultimately picked up for like 50 cents on CD. And yeah, it hasn't aged tremendously well. I wasn't all that into it in the first place, but I guess it was kind of an indirect connection to the Mamas and the Papas and the Beach Boys, though. Oh yeah, I was a huge Weird Al sort of kid, and I'm sure I bought this when, or my parents or whoever bought it, when this was brand new, Bad Hair Day. And I might still have the VHS of this for the music videos with this. So with Amish Paradise and some of those. And I have most of Al's stuff on CD these days, but I'm pretty sure I do not have this one. Otherwise, some more going back into hit territory. The Pretenders, Learning to Crawl. A classic, which I have long since replaced with a CD. Here's a garage sale find from when I was a teenager, the first Marshall Tucker Band album, which I have had on CD twice now. And I first had the remaster from Shout Factory, and they do a good job with videos, but their albums are atrocious. One of the worst sounding CDs I've ever heard. Stupidly overcompressed, clips like crazy, throbs, overly bright. So I replaced it with the CD equivalent of this particular AJK Records issue, and it sounds infinitely better. Let's see, here's one that was new at the time. I don't remember if I bought this with my own money or if my parents got it, but I never got deep into Aerosmith, but I did have this one. So, I don't know, maybe this was before Wayne's World 2. I was going to say maybe it had some sort of connection to that. And I do have this one on CD now as well, and you guessed it, thrift store find. Let's see, I got another early garage sale find, another one that's long since been replaced by a, say it with me, thrift store find CD. Pointer Sisters, Breakout. And I've got a few of their albums, but this was their biggie. This is the one where half the songs on it became real nice big hits. And I still have a soft spot for this one. I've got a good chunk of this on my my iPod these days. Okay, here's one that I know I bought new with my own money, probably at Walmart or something, or Target. Best of the Moody Blues, which really ticked me off in that, one, there's some edits on here, so like Nights in White Satin is totally chopped on this thing. And otherwise, this is not a very good tape. This would have been 1998 or so, but there is nasty crosstalk on this particular copy. And yes, I have since acquired this on CD, and I have a handful of Moody's regular albums. Now, this tape got destroyed in an episode, a Ben's Junk video, on an 8-track to cassette adapter, but I held on to it anyway. This little cheapy Creedence comp that I got at, I believe, a Target when I was like in maybe 5th or 6th grade, that I listened to quite a bit. Even though it's only got, I think, like 3 of their hits, everything else is deep cuts. But I held on to it. But this tape unfortunately got mangled by that thing. So these days when I cover something like that, it has to be truly a sacrificial tape. One that I'm okay with getting destroyed. And there's no point in me seeking that one out on CD. I've got the regular albums. Now, at one point I got a bunch of hand-me-down cassettes from one of my aunts. And here's one of them, Elvis. But I will be damned if I remember much about this. I probably never even listened to it. I probably had enough Elvis already on my own, which isn't that much, but I guess unless you're a real fanatic, you don't need that much. Here's a thrift store find and a very damaged one. Terry Gibbs, Somebody's Knockin'. And there isn't much to this aside from the title cut / hit, which doesn't get played a whole lot anymore. But it's one of those songs that I misheard the lyrics at one point, and it stuck with me, and I thought my lyrics were better. So it's basically a seduction song, and she's quoting the guy that's courting her, and saying, we'll have one heavenly night, which I always heard as one hell of a night. I think I like my lyric better. It certainly fits. Otherwise, here's one that I've since acquired on CD, but not at a thrift store. I got it at a normal record store, but Patti Smyth's first solo album from 1987, which is hit and miss. It's okay. Otherwise, we have one that I have also owned on vinyl and ultimately CD, Carly Simon, Spy. And this would have to be an original issue for this kind of tape design. The sound on this thing is god-awful. It is just pure mud. The vinyl, even, which wasn't all that great, is way better. And then other stuff that I just don't entirely remember my logic behind. Like, I've got 2 copies of this Sylvia album, so Countrypolitan, I guess, soft rock meets country. But maybe one of them was in bad shape or something, and I thought I'd get a better one. But it doesn't matter because I found a CD on, not online, but it was with me again in a thrift store. Let's see here. We got one of those kind of cheapy Rhino Halloween compilations. And I think I only picked this up because it had one of Elvira's Stray singles on it. But this one has mostly sound effects, if memory serves. I did do at least a partial transfer of this, and I couldn't figure out why, because most of the proper songs on here I already had, you know, Monster Mash and all that. Let's see, here's one of those hand-me-down tapes that I got from my mom at one point. These were fairly common once upon a time, these twin-pack 20 greatest hits whatever year, which are kind of a crapshoot in terms of quality or maybe even originality. And it seemed like a lot of songs that weren't hits, or I didn't think were hits because I didn't hear them on the radio. But yeah, most of these actually were indeed hits, and ones that I have come to hear at least somewhat more regularly in the years since. So I got another one of those hand-me-down tapes from my folks, Cruisin' Classics from Shell Oil. And this is, if memory serves, it's all 60s hits. Yeah, 60s and some 70s. And actually not too bad a song selection there if you want to pause the video. But I think every single thing on this tape I've got from other sources at this point. Let's see here. Here's kind of an amusing one. Unfortunately, I don't have the case for it. But my dad was still smoking a bit when I was little, and my mom really gave him hell for it. But he had gotten a Newport cassette, so it has Eddie Money's then current hit, Take Me Home Tonight, on it. But yeah, otherwise it's kind of more deep cuts from the time. Kind of a mix of hits and more deep cut-ish stuff. I wish I had the sleeve to this one. Otherwise, we're getting down to the bottom here. I've got 2 copies of this Bonnie Tyler album, It's a Heartache, and obviously I thought the original wasn't very good, but this is just a very muddy sounding cassette in general. These late 70s tapes usually aren't all that great. And I did get this on CD eventually, not via a thrift store. But I got, in the rest of the world, this is called Natural Force, and I got a copy of that. It's the same album, same track sequence, same everything, and it's still pretty murky sounding. Even that kind of has a weird cassette-ish quality to it. All right, we're down to the last 3 tapes in here. And, well, I referenced this on a thrifting episode, the most recent one, actually, this twofer of the first 2 albums from 10cc. I had found a copy of their first in the thrift store bin, and I mentioned that I went online to try and find a CD of it, and instead I wound up getting the CD equivalent of this particular set, DCC, Digital Compact Classics, so Steve Hoffman's thing, kind of one of the gods of the audiophile world, for better or worse. But this is from I've discussed this before, a lot of tapes that I picked up at Media Play when they were going out of business at 10 cents a piece, and I bought 3 dozen tapes. Otherwise, we got some that were new old stock when I got them. I don't think either of these albums are all that great, but T-Bone Burnett's self-titled effort, which I like a fair amount of his stuff, but this is his attempt at a fairly straight country record, and it's just, it doesn't do much for me. And otherwise, this is the last one for today, Stephen Bishop, Bowling in Paris, which is mostly very disappointing late 80s soft rock. And there's only a couple of keepers on here, and to me the real keeper is the last cut, how appropriate, Hall Light, which it seems to have been recorded a few years earlier, but it's way darker, rocks way harder, it's completely out of step with the rest of the album, and it's got Stephen Bishop backed by Eric Clapton and Sting, and I think it was Phil Collins on the drums too, so an all-star backing to boot. But yeah, it doesn't make the rest of the album any less of a disappointment to me. So anyway, that's it for that box of tapes, and that's it for this little leg of my audio cassette collection. There's still plenty more kicking around, but yeah, I think that's going to do it for today. So I'll sign off here. I'll talk to you again soon.